Okay, hello and welcome. This will be a tutorial for Photoshop. I'm basically going to be creating a scene in Photoshop, doing some image composting and digital painting for it. Unlike the last tutorial I made, this won't directly apply to the assignment. The tools and everything are going to be stuff that'd be helpful, but this isn't necessarily how we want you to complete any of your images. These are just examples of ways to use the tools, and then you can kind of take it from there. So Photoshop works basically with layers. Everything that you create or everything that you put into Photoshop is on a layer of some sort. So we're going to start by creating a new document. Sure, that works. So right there, Photoshop already created the background layer for any default document. It just creates a white layer and it's locked. The first thing I like to do is anytime I'm going to be adding content or putting in an image or whatever it is, I like to create a new layer for everything that I do. And you can create a new layer by this little tab button down here. Just click once and it creates a new layer. So this one, we'll go ahead and name it something. We can just double click on it and let's call this one context. And we'll bring in like a base map of some sort for some context. So with this layer selected, we're just going to go to File, Place. I'm going to navigate to some data to use. So you guys could maybe take an image of the IIT campus or whatever fits your project. Let's see here. We'll use a different one than I used in class. Let's use this one. So I'm just clicking File, Place for that image. It's going to place it right onto that new layer I had. And for some reason you can just hit Enter to accept. You can see over here that it renamed it after I placed that image. And it also added this as a smart object. In order to make changes to this, we're going to want to rasterize this layer. Just right click and hit rasterize. That'll remove what Photoshop calls a smart object, and it'll make it so you can do certain adjustments to it. I'm going to go ahead and size this up a little bit just by and I should mention, if you have your selection tool highlighted and you can see this little box up here that says Show Transform Controls. Make sure that you have that checked. It'll make it a lot easier. You can see if I don't have it checked, it removes I still have this layer selected, I can still move it around, but it removes the little handles on the corners. So if you have your selection arrow selected and you click on Show Transform Controls, it'll give you these little shortcuts to resize and do different transformations. I'm going to hold Shift and just make this a little bit bigger so we can see it a little more, and I'll drag it right there. And you can click Check to accept or just hit Enter. So we have a bit of context to deal with, and it looks like there's some stuff already highlighted. So we'll maybe say, like, I think the assignment had you document from point A to point B, so maybe we'll say that this is point A and this is point B, and we'll kind of do something based off that. Now we can start bringing in some images. I'm going to create another new layer. Actually, let's call this one, I won't bring in images yet, we'll just call this one maybe Path. And we're going to go ahead and paint a path through this context map. So with this path layer selected, once again I created a new layer using this button and named it Path. Photoshop works a couple different ways. Anytime you want to paint or add lines, you could use the line, circle, and square tool. If you hold on this one, if you hold on to this tool, you can make basic shapes like so. But what we actually want to do is use the brush tool. If you click on this little paintbrush, I don't like the shape vector tool for various reasons, so I'm just going to show you the brush tool for today. You can resize it with this slider right here to however large you want it, or you can just use the bracket shortcut to resize it. If you push right bracket or left bracket, it resizes it. So make a relatively small brush size and make sure we're selected that new layer. We'll call it Path. And pick a color over here. I'm going to select yellow, maybe. That works. and then I'm going to hold Alt and zoom in with my mouse wheel, and I think that would be Command or Option and zoom in with Mac. I'm going to make my brush a little bit smaller, and so you can see if I just started to click, and I can click and paint whatever random shape I want. I'm going to hit Control-Z to undo that. What I actually want to do is have it lock to sort of dimensions. It's kind of like AutoCAD, clicking one point and then clicking another. You can draw perfectly straight lines in Photoshop. So let's say I want to go from this building right here to this building right here. Maybe I'm starting right at this point, I'm clicking once right here, and now I'm holding Shift and clicking again right here, and you can see Photoshop just draws a line for you. So you can do it like that, or you can click and hold, and you'll get a squiggly line, I guess. But a quick and easy way to do it is just to click once. I'm clicking right here, and then I'm holding Shift and clicking again right there, and you can see Photoshop draws a perfectly straight line. So that'll be helpful anytime you want to make clean artwork or clean lines in Photoshop. I clicked back on my selection tool to kind of finish out that painting, and now you can see I have that on its own layer, so I can move it around however I want. But we'll leave it right there for now. That looks good. And now we'll go ahead and add or start to kind of create a scene of what that journey might look like. Once again, I'm just kind of making this up. It doesn't directly apply to how you should do your own assignment. I'm going to create a new layer again with this button. We'll go ahead and call this background, and we'll use it to paint sort of a context background. I'm going to go back to my brush tool, or hit B for the shortcut, and size it up a little bit. You can select different brush types, and you can also download customized brush types or make your own. These will work for now, but just a side note. We're going to size that up. Let's create maybe some sort of grayish background to match that looks about right. We'll make a background to match sort of like the city context for this case. I'm going to just start painting on this layer that's called background, and I don't know, just creating maybe some topography. I'm going to adjust the opacity, so this is going to let maybe like 50% of the background image through. And so it looks like it's lighter, but it's actually just more opaque, or less opaque. And we'll take it down one more bit and paint over that once more. So you start to get sort of a middle ground, foreground, background. I like to do this anytime I'm creating a scene, just to add some interest. And let's see. So we have our background layer. We can adjust the opacity of this entire layer. Before we were adjusting the opacity of just what the brush does. Now that we have it actually painted as a layer, you can select here and turn that up or down to let in more or less of what's behind it. You can move it around, you can see how that effect works. But I'm going to keep it at 100% for now. And now we can maybe add I'll show you some image composting techniques to start to create buildings out of sort of 3D buildings out of 2D images. I'm going to create a new layer and call it Building 1. Select that layer and go File, Place. So this is where you could be placing images of your models that you built. I'm going to just place something random. Okay, I'll use this one, and it'll give me another opportunity to talk about selecting and cropping things out. So let's say you have an image like this, and you only want a certain part of it. Like say you only want this triangle shaped model here, and you want to delete the rest of the image. So it's pretty simple to do. In class I showed the polygon lasso tool. This is what I would use for this one. It's the little polygon shape with a lasso around it. And once again, you see this brought this in as a smart object. That's what this little icon means right here. So somebody asked me this in class. If you tried to do certain adjustments, you can see that the brightness you can't do any of these adjustments right now. Photoshop is recognizing this as a smart object layer, and in order to do some of those adjustments, you need to right click on it and go to rasterize layer. So anytime that you see that little icon, that's what that means. And once again, apologies for the trains. Okay, so back to the polygon lasso tool. I'm just going to zoom in and select around this model. It's just simply clicking on edges. Each time you click, it'll make a selection, and I'm just going to trace around it real quick. And in order to close this out, you could either get really close until you see that little circle pop up, or you could just double click on your last point and it'll close it for you. You can see how that worked. So I have the rough outline of that shape, and since on this layer, the current layer that I'm on, this image is the only thing on there. So if I wanted this and I wanted to delete the rest of the background, I've actually selected the exact opposite of what I want to delete. So if I hit delete right now, it's going to delete what I actually wanted to keep. So there's two different ways you could do this. I could do Control-C, Control-V and copy and paste this. That'd be one way. So that would create a whole new layer. You can see it created a whole new layer over here. I'm going to go ahead and delete that though. And so after I deleted that, maybe I still wanted that to be selected. You can see it deselected it for me. I didn't ask it to do it, but it deselected. If you go to select, reselect, it'll pull up your last selection. So maybe I just want to delete everything else. I'm going to go to select inverse or shift control I. So it looks like it's kind of the same, but you can see it actually, the border out here, it actually selected everything except for this. So I'm going to go ahead and click on the layer and then click delete, and it'll delete everything on that layer except for what I wanted. So that worked out perfect. Let's see, this one's already in perspective too, so I'm just going to leave this as it is. And another thing I showed in class is what I like to do is if I'm creating an original scene, say for a project, I like to create a perspective grid to make sure that everything is within true perspective, and it'll make everything look natural. I'm going to create a new layer. I'll call it perspective grid. So these are just going to be some guidelines to help me keep everything in consistent perspective. I'm going to use my paintbrush and maybe some red just so I can see it, and I'm going to click on a vanishing point. I'll make one right there. Oh, and my opacity is down. Make sure to turn that back up. I'm going to say that my vanishing point is right there, and from that point I'm just going to create perspective lines. So I'm clicking once here, holding shift now, and clicking again out here, and Photoshop will complete those lines. I'm going to do that a few times. Clicking once here, holding shift, and clicking out here. Doing the same thing. And once again, this is just going to help me keep everything in consistent perspective. So now we can start to adjust this image as if we were standing there looking at it. And it's pretty close right now. I'm going to tweak it a little bit. So this is also why it's nice to have show transform controls on. You can see by being able to click on this corner, if I left click once here, it brings you directly into like transform mode. And now if I right click on the image and go to distort, I can start to play around with the perspective of it. So I'm just kind of trying to ballpark what this would look like. Lining it up with my perspective grid that I created. That looks about right. So I'm just aligning it so that the lines are all going to the same vanishing point. And I can turn off this perspective grid with any layer. You can click on the little eyeball icon and it'll turn a layer on and off. So it's a really good way to work if you want to just isolate things to work on them, and that way it doesn't delete them if you ever want to turn them back on. So let's add another building. That one was pretty simple. The next one we do, we'll create more of a building out of nothing. This one was essentially already existing. The next one I'll make it a little bit more complex. We'll say this one is called Building 2. I just created a new layer. Oops. Building 2. And with that layer selected, I'm going to go to File, Place. This is the same one I used in class. It worked pretty well. We'll use this one again. I'm going to shrink this down, and we'll put it right there.